You're listening to a CNA podcast.
Hi everyone, this is Crispina flying solo for this episode. Stephen is on a filming trip, so he's not here when the biggest news of the week broke, which is the sentencing of former Transport Minister S Iswaran. Judge Vincent Hoong handed down a 12-month sentence today. The Iswaran case dominated headlines for more than a year after it was announced that he was going to be investigated for corruption. Now, the last time a minister was tainted with the spectre of corruption was back in 1986 when National Development Minister Teh Cheng Wan was investigated for accepting bribes. In that incident, he took his own life before he was charged. Now, this time, at the time of his charging, Iswaran was a PAP veteran. He held important portfolios like trade and transport. So, to talk to me about this very big story in the studio is my colleague from the digital desk, senior journalist Koh Wan Ting. Together with two other reporters, Wan Ting has been covering the Iswaran case, and I'm keen to get a bit of the behind-the-scenes details on what it's like to cover the biggest case in a while. Welcome to the podcast, Wan Ting.
Hi, Crispina.
Okay, Wan Ting, I was watching your updates like it was a nail-biting saga when you were posting for our live blog. Now, safe to say, everyone was surprised when the sentence landed. I remember you were saying, oh my. So tell me a little bit more to the lead up of that sentencing, which of course everyone was there for. The key things that Judge Hoong said before he handed out the sentence.
So, Justice Vincent Hoong said that he had considered the submissions by both the prosecution and the defense, and he also laid out the aggravating factors and the mitigating factors that were put out by the prosecution and the defense in the previous hearing when Iswaran pleaded guilty.
Yeah.
The prosecution asked for about 6 to 7 months, and the defense asked for no more than 8 weeks.
Yep.
And then in the end, Justice Hoong said that he couldn't agree on both positions, and he said he would impose a sentence that was higher than both.
Yeah.
And that was when we were really surprised because it doesn't usually happen in the cases that I've covered.
Let's go into a little bit of the reasons that he laid out. Why he couldn't stick with either the upper end of what the prosecution wanted, nor what the defense asked for, right? So he said that it would have been manifestly inadequate.
Yes, he said that it would be manifestly inadequate, also considering the aggravating factors of the case, such as the total duration of Iswaran's offending and the high office that he occupied because he was a minister and he was a chairman of the F1 steering committee at the time as well.
Yeah.
Justice Hoong said that it wouldn't be remedied by his disgorgement.
That means him paying back the money doesn't take away the fact that he did all of these things.
And he harmed public interest.
Yeah, because he had brought some reputational damage to the government.
Yes, correct.
In general, what was the mood like in the courtroom when this was announced, when the judge gave his sentence?
I wasn't in the courtroom per se, so I was in a separate media room where we had a live stream of the proceedings. But even in the media room, we could feel it was very tense. So we were just hanging on to every word the judge was saying.
Yeah.
And when he said that the sentence would be in excess of what the prosecution and the defense asked for, we were like, whoa. So it was a surprising turn of events for us.
When you spoke to lawyers after this, what are some of the common reactions you've been getting?
One of the lawyers I spoke to actually said that he wasn't surprised by the severity of the sentence per se, but he was more surprised by how much in excess the judge imposed. Compared to what the prosecution asked for, the judge imposed 5 more months of jail.
That's right.
But this lawyer that I spoke to said that the judge was definitely justified in what he did because of all the aggravating factors that he laid out.
Okay, this is actually not the only twist in this tale. So let's go back to the case when it first went to court. You guys were expecting a trial, and then you were told, hey, it's going to be done and dusted in one day. Tell me a little bit about that one.
That was definitely a shocker for all of us journalists in the media room. So I remember that we all turned up quite early to report Voices on the Ground. A number of people who queued up from as early as, I think, 6 a.m.
Yeah.
We waited for the case to start at 10 a.m. We were all prepped. So for myself, I even brought an extension cord to the media room, anticipating a long day of trial and maybe 3 more days of trial because it was slated from September 24th to September 27th.
Yes.
So we were all prepared to stay in court the whole day. We even prepared our own lunches. And then suddenly, Davinder Singh goes, my client is prepared to take a certain course of action. And the reporters just looked at each other and like, he's going to plead guilty.
Okay, tell me a little bit more about being able to communicate quickly what's happening in court and then sending back the information to base and then your editors going through your stuff. What are the key things that you guys need to be careful about?
So it always helps to be prepared for the cases, so to be well versed with the charges, what they are, and a timeline of the events and when they happen before you go into the case, so that you have all this background knowledge that can pull out when you are dealing with a court case that's proceeding really fast.
Yeah.
But it also helps that I have a whole team backing me up. So I had a colleague who was in court transcribing what actually happened word for word, verbatim. I was the one who was taking all that and summarizing it into digestible pieces for our live blog.
Yeah. I think a lot of people don't realize actually it's quite stressful to be in a media scrum. Tell me a bit more about that.
Apart from getting out really early to speak to the first person of the queue, which is what my colleague did, you have to be prepared that you will be jostled a lot on the ground when you're taking photos or when you're trying to ask questions or when you're trying to just get a video or a proper shoot of the people walking in.
Yeah.
And we also have to look out for, not just Iswaran, we wanted to look out for his lawyers, we wanted to look out for his wife as well. And they could be entering the court from different places as well,
Yes,
because
of
there are
course.
two entrances.
Yep.
There's the main entrance and there's the basement entrance, which is quite a walk away. So if he decides to go to one and not the other, you will have missed him. So you have to be prepared for all these scenarios as well.
It's definitely a different day in the office, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's not every day you see a high-profile case involving a minister who is at the wrong side of the law.
Yep.
The adrenaline is one thing, but just knowing how to report live, it's a whole new experience.
Okay, thank you, Wan Ting, for coming.
Thank you, Crispina.
It was a surprise, like much of this case from the start, from amended charges to S Iswaran pleading guilty to a 1-year sentence. We want to get the help of lawyer Sunil Sudheesan to break down a bit of what happened in court this morning. We are recording in the afternoon. Welcome to Deep Dive, Sunil.
Hello.
Quick reaction on the sentencing. This is the thing that was interesting to us. The prosecution had asked for between 6 to 7 months in jail. Defense asked for a maximum of 8 weeks. And Justice Hoong landed on 1 year, which was quite surprising. I have to admit, I was a bit surprised. Justice Hoong set out his reasons for it. Now, first, is it normal for sentences to be higher than what both defense and prosecution asked for? Bearing in mind, by the way, that Section 165, the maximum is 2 years.
The answer is no. Usually when it comes to plea arguments and sentencing arguments and all that, judges usually take what the prosecution say as probably the upper limit. There have been occasions, obviously, when judges have gone beyond the limit if they think the case calls for that kind of messaging to be sent to the public.
Right.
So the recent case I can think about is DJ Sharmila, who in the MFA watch the
diplomatic
pouch.
bag, yeah.
That's right. So in that case, she gave 1 week in jail. Prosecution and defense both asked for fines. So lawyers were changed and the arguments are going on appeal now before Justice Dida Singh.
Yeah.
So it does happen.
But it's not normal, is what you're saying.
It's not normal. We seldom see it, and when we do, usually as defense lawyers, we're quite heartbroken.
So Mr. Davinder Singh would have been quite heartbroken.
No, like he's the top lawyer and he's a tough cookie.
Okay. Second, Justice Hoong mentioned that sticking to this range, what they both suggested would have been quote-unquote manifestly inadequate. Now, he laid out the key reasons. There are two main parts to this, right? Basically, he said that the mitigating factors, the amounts were small, there was no victim in this, etc., were not strong, but the culpability factor was much stronger. The fact that he was such a senior member of government, the higher the office, the higher the culpability.
In this particular case, ultimately, there was no evidence of corruption. That means there was no overt favor shown by Mr. Iswaran to any of the persons involved. It came down to Section 165, which guards against the creation of the conflict of interest.
Explain that a little bit more.
So if you have a business relationship with the public servant, the public servant cannot receive gifts because once the public servant receives gifts, he may feel obliged. So it's that creation of that perhaps obligation that creates the conflict of interest.
I
so 165 was meant to, if you would, guide the behavior of civil servants.
Right. Which is why it's broad.
That's right.
So this 165 essentially captures that idea
That's
that
right.
it's about integrity, it's about incorruptibility, it's about the position you inhabit, right?
Totally right. And it deals with persons who have existing business relationships.
The case was supposed to go to trial, and then on that day, that was a kind of a twist as well when the charges were amended and he pleaded guilty. So there's a big difference between corruption and accepting gifts under Section 165.
So let me deal with two things first. Number one, it was a twist only to those who didn't know.
What do you mean by that?
That means in the negotiation process, they were going to High Court to fight for statements and all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
But the parallel route was being run as well, which is, can we do a deal in terms of sentence or in terms of the
And
charges?
doing a deal is normal?
Perfectly normal.
Right.
We do it all the time. You'll be surprised in the number of cases that crack on the first day. That means it gets resolved on the first day.
Which is what happened here.
That's right. People on the inside would know already, and clearly they knew because they were prepared with all the mitigation arguments already,
That's
right?
right, yeah.
And sentencing arguments. So
Yeah.
this was something known to everybody with
The
advance
relevant
notice.
parties like your
That's right.
defense and your prosecution.
That's right. The second thing you talked about was no corruption in this case. Okay, so that's significant to me. We know that 165 is part of the suite of offences to deal with protection against corruption. But 165 doesn't suggest any corruption to begin with. It suggests a conflict of interest, but conflict of interest doesn't jump straight to corruption.
Okay, but explain to my listeners what needs to be quite clear-cut corruption.
Clear-cut corruption is the giving of a favour in exchange for the gift. That's clear-cut. Okay?
So, for example, if I bought you a meal,
And you get a contract to build a road in return.
right, that's clear-cut.
That's the absurd scenario, of course.
Of course. But it's this idea of quid pro quo, right?
Precisely. There has to be a meeting of the minds. There has to be an exchange of favours, if you would.
Yeah.
And there has to be something done to the detriment of your principle. So, for example, let's say building the road, right?
Okay.
I have 5 bids that come in. Your bid is actually the second lowest. I should be giving to the lowest bid, for example.
Okay.
But then I remember that nice makan you gave me, yeah?
Yeah.
So maybe the second lowest bid can get the deal instead. So that means that my principal is deprived of the ability of getting the lowest bid.
Right.
This is assuming that all 5 are equal quality. So in that scenario, because of the detriment suffered by the principal, because of the favour given,
Right.
that's clear-cut corruption.
Just to follow up, in the eyes of the ordinary man, they may not see a real difference between Section 165 and corruption because as far as they can see and based on what the judge has said, Mr. Iswaran did damage the reputation of the government.
Let's put it in a slightly different way. Members of the public will be angry that ministers are taking gifts. And then,
And rightfully so.
yeah, you're in such a position, you're getting paid well already.
Yeah.
And you're still taking this kind of gifts
Yeah.
from people whom you have business relationships with. So that incites a level of emotion, obviously.
Yes.
It runs afoul of the law. So therefore, a custodial sentence is necessary.
This is one of the biggest cases, right? Just looking at the judgment, for example, what's very clear to you?
It's very clear that the courts will come down hard on public servants. The issue that is up for discussion now is very straightforward when you're a minister and you're taking gifts from people you are dealing with,
Sure.
a business relationship. The nuance of business relationships will be good to scope out sometime in the future. The nuance of what is a public servant and how lines are to be drawn.
Yep. The way this whole thing has played out, it does feel like a cautionary tale. So thank you for coming. Thank you to the team as well. Janani Johari, Tiffany Ang, Joanne Chan, Saya Win, To Yen Yun, and sound mixing is by Ken Delbridge. Thank you, everyone. See you next week when Steve and I will be back.